everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, I think this is part 4. I haven't checked. I think this is part 4 of this leather metal tutorial. I know this one is taking a bit longer than normal, but I'm hoping to kind of get a big chunk of it done today, and then we can start with kind of final details. The stitching I kind of consider final details, but we'll start drawing and kind of go from there, because I've already got plans for the next tutorial as well as a new series on the channel that will be shorter format kind of tutorial types things. But yeah, that will hopefully be launching the first episode after part 4 is up. So I'll probably say a week or so. Either the upload right after it or the second upload after it. But yeah, let's get stuck in. I want to fill in the side. Last time we kind of worked a bit on building up the layers on these leather reins, as well as deepening up this and doing some work on the metal chain itself. So we're going to fill in the side, which includes all of this, and then these what looks like bells underneath. So we're going to fill that in. The first layers should not take too long. But yeah, and then we'll work on the strap as well. So let's get stuck in, because there's still quite a large bit of metal that needs to be filled in here. So we'll start from the left and work our way to the right and down. So I'm going to quickly just take a brush, put some powder on it, and we're going to start here with this, looks like a wooden part of a wooden thing of the harness. I'm going to put majority on that part first. I didn't tap off a whole bunch of the excess. And then here as well. So if you've got a smaller fluffy brush, you can use that. Just need to get my bearings. So this also is part of that. There's some stitching here, and then it goes down. And then I'm just going to take what's left over and go over the metal part. Alright, so I'm going to take my F pencil, and I'm going to use this similarly to what I did with the rest, map out, kind of define the areas, and then yeah, it's very similar to the initial layers of the metal itself. You can also use a 2H for this step. It should also work perfectly well, especially if you don't want to go in with a lot of depth initially and need some time to just figure out what's going on. I sometimes do that when it's a very intricate area that I don't want to add too much to just yet. So just going in and refining all of my shapes and getting kind of a good idea of what's going on. So as with all the other things that I've done in this tutorial, we start with our darkest shadows first that we map out. And then you can either lightly go over the other areas with a pencil, or you can just use, once we blend, just use your blending stump to blend into the lighter areas. So I'm just going to take a blending stump and just quickly blend that out. So you can see your main highlight runs here at the top, kind of just above the halfway point is your highlight. And then you've got a shadow here from the metal bar thing. And then obviously the depth down here, also from the surrounding areas, and then your highlights in the middle. You've got some textures more prevalent on this side, and obviously you've got some form of marking here. But that's more top layer type of stuff. Now I'm just going to take a 2H, and just define that edge and just fill in this area. So this is merely just to get my base layer down. Not really too worried about values or it being correct or making any form of sense. For certain stuff, I prefer to only kind of work on once majority of the drawing is kind of nearing their final layers, as it just makes it easier, especially if it's got a very similar texture or value to something surrounding it. Then I kind of choose which of those kind of areas are more important or is more important to the overall piece. Then I work on that first, and then I'll work on the other one with similar values or textures. That way I can kind of play around, getting some type of difference between the two, But knowing that the one that I find is more important will have the established values and textures already put into place. And then the other one will just kind of be similar but not entirely. Shouldn't be the same, otherwise it will just blend into one another. So I'm just using this 2H to fill in the rest of this wood. So you've got a bit of wood sticking out here in between all of the metal, and it's also here, so I'm just going to add a defining line there. And then obviously it's sticking out here. Define your shapes. So in these areas, take a look at the shape of your negative space, just to make sure that it's similar to the reference. And then you've got one that sticks out here. That's very small. The rest of it's all metal pieces, and then there's one here at the bottom as well that sticks out. And then there's obviously a metal kind of trim. Here's almost very similar values, so I'm gonna add a defining line, and this is obviously more important than this. In color it looks different, but I think values for me, these two would be very similar. So I'll complete this part of the leather first. It might be slightly darker, but for now we just need to make sure that you can discern between the two spaces. Okay, this is more, I would say, wood texture. So just gonna go back in with my F pencil. Also just cleaning up my shapes. This has got some nice variation in kind of the way the wood looks. So that would be very difficult. This area of here would be very difficult to make sure it's not a texture that you create, and also not so that the values would make the viewer think it's changing in shape. So these will be very subtle values that you would add, just to make sure that it shows that it's the actual material's color that changes. We can't obviously show color, but it's not reflections like in the metal. It's not a texture change, it's just, it has marks on the surface that doesn't, yeah, it doesn't add texture. So this is going to be a very subtle type of experiment. You can, sometimes it's best to only like pick a few things. So for instance here, it's got a very interesting, almost like, it looks like water reflections coming off of this metal bit. That's very interesting to add. And then also the very subtle differences here at the top. You can completely not include these spots, brown spots. that you see on the reference closest to this leather strap. And also it's got these lines here. So I think the most interesting thing is in this area around this metal bit, you also get some form of reflection and shadow on the side, and then your very subtle kind of, I wouldn't say it's a grain, but kind of differences in the material's color up here. Obviously down here you need to note that there's a value difference due to reflections from what's going on around it. So here it's going to be difference in your contrast, your lights and your darks. So it's a lot different than fur. Fur is a same texture across the board. It just differs because of what's kind of the structure of the animal and also your light source. Here you've got color differences, you've got maybe textural differences in the same material, which makes life a bit interesting once you've kind of got to start drawing it. But that's kind of part of the challenge. So in this tutorial, there's quite a lot of different types of textures for the same. You've got three main materials here: leather, metal and wood, and each one of them has differences across the entire drawing, which makes it interesting. It's probably the reason why these tutorials kind of very stretch out, because it's quite a daunting task once you get stuck into it, and it's a very sameness across the board. The last Sound of Drawing episode that I posted, the Trevi Fountain, I can get quite involved with that one because there's lots of different elements across the entire drawing. I mean, the statues are very interesting to draw, and then you've got the stonework and the water and all the intricate carvings and details, and the lettering I think will be the most difficult part of the entire drawing for me. Just perspective, and you know, it's a large drawing, but it's a large area that you are drawing, so everything gets quite small. And with that, it's lots of things to drag you around the drawing to keep you invested. In these kind of monotonous types of close-ups, there's certain close-ups that I love doing. Eyes are one of them. I think this channel needs another eye tutorial because they are fantastic. I think there's a lot to be learned in eyes. But this one, it's the same three elements across the board. Different slightly, but still very the same. So you can't just go somewhere else and have a bit, kind of a change of pace, so to speak. So I think this is a challenge in itself for me to just keep invested. But it's a valuable kind of tutorial that I think it's worth completing, and that's why I chose it in the first place. I mean, I love all the detail stuff. It's just getting the motivation to do it. I think that's kind of the hardest part of being. I'm not a full-time artist, so I've got I've got work and lots of other hobbies and interests that I need to juggle around my drawings, and I think that's kind of the hardest part of being what I consider art is my hobby. It's a passion. Just to also keep invested. I mean, if I didn't have the channel, I don't think I would do this drawing. But obviously I've now decided I quite like teaching, and also forces me to really grow in my art, even though I do it naturally. With now the venture into the architectural type stuff, I only have two actual horse drawings on the go, which was my bread and butter for a long time. and my subject of choice. It still is my subject of choice, but I've now started to, I want to obviously grow. There's one large project, I keep mentioning it, that I want to do that's got a lot of architectural elements. That's part of it. It's also, I want to add some forest type stuff, and I haven't done landscape in that type of way, so I've got to start kind of dipping my toes into those areas. And it's a lot different texturally to draw. When, like the Trevi fountain, it's so fun to do. It's almost like a brain workout, because you've now got to change the way you approach certain things. Not necessarily completely change your style, but just, I can do fur with my eyes closed, let's be honest. Metal and leather the same. But when it comes to stonework, it's a lot different texturally. You kind of have to approach your layers slightly differently. And you've got to force yourself to leave certain marks and lines in, because it adds to the texture. Whereas with fur and leather, I kind of like that blended look. And the stonework does have that kind of nice blend, especially in certain areas. But I do, for the Trevi fountain and even the Acropolis statues, those kind of material, the folds, I love drawing those. So that's also kind of a tutorial that is in my mind. That lovely folds you get in materials or shirts, dresses even. I think it's so fun to draw. It really is. But doing it on that scale, it's also a nice challenge to be able to kind of see how far you can push yourself with your details, which is quite fun. So I really do enjoy the new kind of subject matter. And the lions in the foliage, that's a completely, because the lions are a very small part. I can draw the lions with my eyes closed, but the foliage is it's interesting, it's fun, it's frustrating at the same time. You can't just let your mind wander with it, because I let my mind wander with the fur and the things. The elephant, it's very organic. Once you've got your basic guides down for how the wrinkles and everything grows, you can kind of just let your mind wander and go on autopilot, because it's very similar, it behaves very similarly to one another, and that's quite fun. But that's also got the grasses, and that's very soft and out of focus, which is something else that I quite struggle with. So all of these pieces have very familiar elements, and then they've got a lot of unfamiliar, the type of things that I would have generally avoided as a younger artist starting out my journey. But it's those type of elements that are quite striking in drawings. So yeah, it's fun to challenge myself. Which is nice. I think that doing the channel really helps with that type of thing as well. So it's nice. Okay, done rambling. Now I'm going to move on to here. So this is metal. These, I think it's bells. It looks like bells. This is metal, but it's obviously got a very different texture to the chain and these kind of trim pieces, and even the these stuff on my brain. But this is going to be very, very interesting. I think it's a deceptively difficult texture to draw. The smoother reflective metal is a lot easier. You've got some texture in this one as well. And then you've obviously got the, I don't know if it's leather or metal, leather or some other material. And then very out of focus, you've got your fringe. So we're going to fill in that with our initial layers. And then I think I'm going to move on to detailing out the straps more. And then we're going to go into this metal bit right here. Right, so I think I'm going to stick, let's just take my F pencil and go around. I'm just going to make sure everything is the right shapes. Sorry if you can hear the squeaky chair. It annoys me as well, but it's all I've got. So this is some strange ropey material. I think it's rope. But it shouldn't be too difficult. Just need to make sure that everything looks the way it's supposed to. So we'll leave everything blank that's horse. And then it also extends, there's a little bit here that you can see. That's also part of all the leather trimmings. So for this one, I didn't grid it up, I traced it. I did mention it in the beginning. So I do miss some elements, but with majority of the drawing in and correctly proportioned, it's a lot easier to use it to be able to fill in the gaps if you've missed it, which makes it a lot easier. Since this is nice and dark, I'm just going to fill it in quickly. This is almost like some form of softer leather. I've also taken, I haven't looked at that reference in 2 or 3 weeks, but I've also was at a show where one of the riders had a Western saddle. I do have references for Western saddles, which I think is also a fun type of leather. Once you've, I think this is a nice foundation drawing. The metal I don't think I will ponder too much on about in other tutorials, but the leather, once you've got bridles that have intricate work. There's a Frisian drawing that I did that's got also a very, very interesting bridle that would be fun. It's like a braided bridle, but those leather that's got the engravings and all of that is also fun to do the textures with things on top of it. So that's, I've got a bunch of my own references. The Labby was my own reference. That's, it's got some fun. The majority of it's obviously horses, I've got cats, got a few cars, and other stuff. So yeah, that's definitely a plan. I think more next year is to go out and capture my own references, especially I think for the tutorials it's nice, but obviously there's certain things that I can't capture myself. I want to next year. We used to go there a lot for holiday. We had a holiday home there, and they have a lot of sanctuaries around there, wildlife sanctuaries. They've got a wolf one, they've got a bird of prey, and then there's a large monkey sanctuary, a wild cat sanctuary, snakes, reptiles, and then there's a very large outdoor, it's called birds of paradise. It's a large area covered under net, and then you walk through a wooded area with all the birds roaming free. It's in Plettenberg Bay. Any South African that ever travels to that area, Plettenberg Bay area, I think it's a must see. The monkeys as well is roaming free under a netted area. I think we did that once, but me and any form of ape or monkey, I don't I don't trust them. But that's definitely a plan for next year, is to go on holiday to that area, take my camera with, get some references, because we don't have zoos. I think the only zoo that I know of in South Africa is in Joburg. The rest are all kind of smaller sanctuary type things. And then obviously we've got the national parks and the large game parks, but those are quite a distance away from us. My parents are in 2 weeks going to the Kaglagadi. I would have loved to go on with, but the drive is horrendous up there. It's in a different province. It's a long drive and the roads are terrible. But I think once I've got proper lenses, I know you can hire them. My mom mentioned you can hire the lenses to do kind of long distance photography. I'm just going to take a blending brush, a blending stump with some powder on it. Then I would love to visit the reserves and take photos of the wildlife, but that's a long-term kind of thing, to start accumulating my own references. I mean, we're very privileged in South Africa to have kind of your large game around us. I was fortunate enough, we were in, it's a place called Faber-Castell. It's in the Western Cape, but I think some of them, it goes into the Eastern Cape as well. We were lucky enough to see leopards there, which is it's a rarity in South Africa because they're such shy animals. We have traps all over the Karoo and Faber-Castell for them. So we were fortunate enough to see leopards. 2 cubs got caught in the traps. And we were fortunate enough to be there when they set them free. We were on the back of a bakkie, which is a pickup truck. And Mum was in the cliffs next to us. I didn't see her, but we saw the cubs. They were quite large. They're quite loud. So we saw that, seen hyenas cheetahs. We saw lions in a distance, obviously buffalo, and then if you go to Addo Elephant Park near PE, which is, I can't say the new name for PE, I'll butcher it. Tons of elephants, but obviously fantastic subject matter to draw. Rhinos are scarcer because of the poaching, and they generally, if you ever come to South Africa, they generally ask not to post the location of where you took your rhino photos, but there's a game reserve close to us that does have rhinos, so maybe a game drive there. But their lions and stuff don't roam free, they're in smaller camps. So your more larger herbivores and antelope and buck, and I think they've got buffalo. I'm not sure. But yeah, so the plan is next year to kind of get a large stash of my own references. Horses for me is a lot easier to get references of because I'm involved in the sport, so it's a lot easier. And I've got a cat, but she's just one form, one blob of fur. Can get some nice fur tutorials out of her. This is just an H pencil, so I'm just kind of, I can't talk and draw at the same time. Then I go on autopilot and then I don't do anything. So I'm just taking this H pencil to kind of smooth out and add a very subtle extra layer of depth. So yeah, that is the plan. This year is kind of already nearing, I can't believe we're in September already. 2 weeks away from October. It's turning into summer now, which I think I'm quite ready for. We had a very, very, very wet winter. It's now currently snowing up to kind of more the western side, Gauteng. Very, very, lots and lots of snow that side of the country. So winter's not entirely done with us just yet, but we had a very, very wet winter. I don't think it was possible after last year, with record numbers of rainfall and flooding, especially here where I live. So it's nice to go into summer, have longer days, which is, I think, to me, the biggest thing. I like the weather in the winter, but I prefer the longer daylight of the summer. So earlier, it's lighter earlier. I don't like doing things in the dark. In the mornings, I get busy in the evenings, then I don't mind doing things in the dark. But it's nice in the morning to wake up, and because I work full time, starting your work in the dark is not, it's not pleasant. It's not, I would say it's not pleasant. But it's only for a few months in the year, and then it's kind of nice. Not looking forward to the heat, but that's a compromise I guess I'll be able to live with. So this is an HB pencil. Sorry, so my mind is wandering towards the leather. So the leather I'm going to do similar to what we did for this, just kind of build up. And this strap is very textured and weathered and worn. So we'll start kind of alluding to that texture as well. So I'm just going to take my HB and kind of go around, refine certain areas and shapes take away kind of that rough, out of focus look that you get with your initial layers. I still need to also do the, I'm gonna call them bells. I don't know what they are. I'm not very, I've not been around harness horses enough to know all the gadgets' names, unfortunately. Even the stuff that comes on normal horse tack, I don't know the names of. Especially these small little metal things. Clasps? Metal clasps, maybe? I don't know. Someone with English as a first language, please let me know. If I do add like pencil first to any area, then I'll just have it kind of loose and soft pressure, and then just use kind of a dirty blending stump to blend it out. By now, if you've done a few of my tutorials, I don't know how I did it in the earlier tutorials that I have posted. It should be very similar. But I think I've refined my techniques a little bit since then. So it should be similar, but I saw an old time lapse I did. I was scrolling through Instagram or something, and I watched one of my old time lapses, and this was before I had powder. And I was so intrigued to see how I did everything with pencils and blending it. Obviously the results look a lot different. I don't think I could create the same depth back then. This was pre-COVID. So we're talking, what's it now, 5+ years ago. And that was so interesting to see. I think the oldest tutorial I've got on here is a bull, and then there's an Arab horse. And there obviously I didn't have powder. I need to kind of, I think, look back on it, and a few smaller drawing time lapses that I did where I also didn't have powder, and it looks so much different. So I would say powder completely changed the way my drawings look. I think it gave me the ability to add depth slowly and smoothly. I think that's the benefit of powder, is the kind of the control you have in the mess to build depth. This is just an H pencil that I'm using to add just a slightly darker layer. The HB was a bit too much. I think the F pencil would also be a little bit too much. So that's nice. I mean, to see the way, and I think the most viewed video on my channel is a black background where I think I did quite a lot of layers. I think that's still the best way to do it. But I've now gotten, the line drawing's got a black background. I've now got the Mars Lumographs, which is black. So that's very interesting to see. I even think the second highest viewed video on my channel, which is how to lay up graphite. It's also slightly outdated. I think the principles are still very similar. But I think even that video I kind of did off the cuff. But there's still lots to do. I want to make a whole series on kind of the basics of realism. So I've got lots of ideas on my mind. I'm just taking this H pencil and mapping out this metal clasp thing and refining it. I'm kind of this entire bits and even this metal I'm going to do along with the strap, the leather strap. So this metal and obviously the trim and this one right here, these are quite your larger parts of metal where you can really refine and add those smaller details, whereas with this you kind of have to, there's not enough space to add it. So with these metal bits, obviously it's going to take a lot more building up because you can add more and you can show the subtle differences better. So it's going to take a little bit more time to finish. If you're hearing music somewhere in the neighborhood, music is playing. I don't know if it will pick up. I hope not. It is a beautiful day outside, so I wouldn't put off the fact that a lot of people will probably be outside enjoying the sun. So I'm just going to take a small little blending brush and just blend this out. I obviously want these very stark highlights. This side is obviously facing the light source directly, so it's very, very white and bright and highlighted. I obviously don't leave areas blank, so that will be a very light wash of pencil or powder at the very end. So now I'm going to just sharpen my HB pencil. And just kind of, I haven't erased a thing in this 50 minutes, so I'm just going to take my mono eraser and kind of just lighten up this area ever so slightly. Not that it's not completely in the shadows. So still light pressure, it's obviously a large area, so you don't have to be as deliberate as with all of these other metal pieces. The larger the area, I would advise to take your time a little bit more, build up the layers. Smaller areas, kind of be deliberate, get in, get out. Kind of compress, or kind of simplify your layering process. So I am jumping around a bit, but once I've got like a pencil in hand that I want to use on a different area, I kind of just jump right to it. Just gonna deepen this up. And then I'm gonna have my F pencil close by. Just wrong F pencil. This one doesn't layer very well. The other F pencil is no, this is a B. This is my F. So I want the Cretacolor one because it layers, it just adds depth. I kind of shortly explained the differences in what I use to create my drawings video that I posted in this month. Just the Cretacolors layer significantly better, especially the lower range pencils. They're H range and F pencils, they just layer a lot better on top of each other and established areas. Which I don't think the Faber-Castells do very well. Just gonna blend that out. This line looks quite dark, but in relation to what everything else is gonna look like, it should be just fine. Now, this texture, this is my HB. So this is one of those organic areas, these weathered looks on your leather, that you don't actually need to follow the reference exactly. If you put in all the lines as you drawed them, obviously if you had a grid, then obviously you can be a bit more precise. But since I don't have a grid, and I didn't grid this up, I am just gonna wing it, basically. So with very light pressure. With very light pressure, I'm just gonna add like little lines, just to kind of show that they're there. I mean, it's gonna look very simple and not right. Some of them are going to be darker, others have got little shadows underneath them, so just very lightly just add some lines. And I'm going to take my mono eraser, You can use any form of eraser that's got a harder, I won't use Kneaded Eraser for this, but if you've MacGyvered yourself a smaller eraser, then use that. Just clean it up ever so slightly. And with the light, so if you look at your reference, you'll see all your highlights behave the same way. They're on the top of your line. So knowing that, with even if you've made up where all your lines go, just very roughly kind of add. This really does not have to be precise. If you want to make it precise, you are more than welcome to spend more time on it for now. But to me, this is kind of a nice way to just build up the layers. Don't have to be very precise. So just take a moment to see how the light behaves in that area, and then you very roughly can get the idea that it's not a smooth leather strap without much effort. So we are moving on because we've got lots of stuff to do. So I'm going to take a brush and try not to mess powder everywhere, which I just did. Take a brush, put some powder on it, tap off the excess, and just fill your bar. I'm gonna go over the edge because I can easily clean it up. I don't need to be that precise. There's 1, 2, 3. And I'm also just gonna lay some of that powder over this metal trim. Now, where is my Kneaded Eraser? That's the other question. Just give me a sec. I had to pause to find it. It was on another desk. So I've got it. Just need to clean it up a bit. There we go. And then just clean my edges. You can put masking tape, painter's tape to keep all your blank kind of your the area surrounding your drawing to keep it clean. You obviously don't have to do that step if you work right to the edge of your drawings. So I am going to take, sorry if my mind's a bit everywhere, but it's just what it is this morning. I'm going to take an F pencil and start just following the same steps as what I normally do. Your darker areas first. Now obviously this one has lettering, which I did not add in my gridding up of this drawing, or kind of tracing of it. And there's obviously no kind of reference to it surrounding it, because this shape is just a bell shape and it's got nothing to it. So how I then go about adding this, so I'll take a 2H, I'll take a lighter pencil that's not going to add too much depth or anything. So I look first at kind of the angle. So I can see here that I assume the word is Paris. I think it looks like it. So this corner here is not word. And then I will look kind of that S where it will line up. Kind of either, is it bottom half, bottom third, bottom whatever, or top. And I'll see here if I zoom it out just slightly, it's kind of just below halfway from this strap down to the bottom. So I would say around about here looks about right. And this P will end where this shadow is, just slightly behind it. So I will just make a little line there just to say that's where it ends, and the P is kind of quite shallow, so I would say it goes almost like that. And then the A, the end, if you look this top part, it kind of ends there. It follows the same way top, so I'd say it goes about there. So you just want to make sure if you're doing this type of figuring out where your stuff goes, you obviously need to make sure it goes in the right direction, the angles are correct. So you pick, I would say this kind of corner underneath the word is a negative space, because obviously it's not part of what you want to draw or outline. So I'll just look at that, and that's a lot of an easier kind of area to figure out the angle and everything. And then from that, you kind of just wing it and figure it out in relation to other things. So, and the bonus of doing everything in light layers is it's a lot easier to fix your mistakes. So I'm just going to use this pencil to just add in my letterings. And this is obviously, it's visible, but it's not, I won't blame you if you just choose not to add it, to be honest with you. I might, if I don't like the way it looks, I'll just go over it and make it smooth. I'll easily just do that. It's not important to the drawing at all, so you don't need to add it if you don't want to. So I'll decide if I can't get it the way I want it to look, then I'll just go over it, smooth it out, and then it's like it never even happened. But at least you've tried. I would say try it first, and then if you're not happy with it, then you just smooth it out. So your main highlight is on this side here, and it makes slightly like a odd triangle. And with this one, obviously the further back it goes, it's more in the shadows. So I'm just going to also deepen up everything surrounding it. Not here, because you've got some lighter areas. it will become a lot easier to see your shadows and your highlights, that subtle value changes in areas of dark or areas of light, and to be able to see it, to be able to discern between a subtle maybe color change or whether it's really a reflection or a shadow or a highlight. That will just come as you go along. That's why it's a lot easier to start out with your references in grayscale or black and white, and then move up to drawing it when your reference is in color. So there's certain things like, for instance, I switch between, for the lion drawing, I switch between the color and the black and white reference. So the reference initially is in color and I just edit it to be grayscale. I switch between the two. I find it a lot easier to map out the foliage when it's in black and white because of the stark difference. The Trevi fountain I draw exclusively in grayscale because I just prefer the way you can really see the changes in the stonework and all the statues and stuff compared to the reference, which is initially in color, so I edit it to be grayscale. Obviously in a grayscale that I like, where you don't lose everything in your highlights and in your shadows. So if you do edit your own references to grayscale, just be wary, just be mindful of the fact that to not overdo kind of your contrasts and your highlights and your shadows, so that you don't lose details in those areas, which I think easily happens. Obviously, if you're a photographer, sometimes you want the drama and then it doesn't matter. But as an artist, especially if you're working a larger scale and you found a reference in color but you want to convert it to black and white, just be mindful to not over edit it, basically, because you lose some very beautiful details in your shadows and highlights. So before I move on to this metal bit, so you can see with this metal bit, it's very light, it's very shiny, but that would be just a very light wash of powder and pencil. Even with this leather, I'm not gonna make this completely as bright white, even this one here. I'm gonna kind of tone it down as I go along. Kind of create the values that would have been there if it wasn't as harsh a light source. And that's also something you kind of learn as you go. But first you obviously need to know how the material behaves and how to draw it and that type of thing. And then your mind kind of automatically fills in the gap at some point. Obviously there's enough of the material across the reference to use as reference. So it just makes it a little bit easier. So I'm going to take a blending stump, put some powder on it, really tap off the excess. Just going to go in these areas first. And then not adding anything else. I'm going to go into this metal bit. Change your pressure depending on how deep the value is. And I've already added a very light wash of powder anyways. H pencil. So we're going to go into these bell things first. So as you can see, the 2H is making still a difference. We are now just trying to get rid of that grainy look, or start to get rid of that grainy look. Define your edges as you go. You can either use a clean, let me use a clean blending stump to blend out those lighter areas, and then I'll use another sort of clean one. Sort of clean one in your highlighted areas. I like to keep like one or two of them, my blending stumps, relatively clean. I only have like this is the cleanest one, followed by that one. So I don't have a lot of them. Now going into this metal, so I'm just gonna give it a little define the edge. So I'm going to pick a point, so I'm going to use this bottom. I think it's a rivet hole, something. Really color in. This is me coloring in, basically. And as you go towards the top, you slightly lessen your pressure. Constantly looking what your reference is doing, the shapes it's creating. Lots of very sharp lines. and everything. But since we're using my layering methods, we can be quite loose in the initial stages, and then you just clean up as you go. I'm going to take my semi-clean one. Start in your darker areas, and then you move towards your lighter ones. And as you build the depth in the surrounding areas, these which seem as it's too dark compared to the reference will start to look a lot lighter. And obviously we still need to build quite a bit of depth. So I'm going to take my F pencil and then just deepen up this, your darkest section of this entire metal kind of trim piece. And then just blend as you go along. So the speckling you see in that area can easily add later with our mono erasers. So I'm not too worried about that. As long as you keep your application light, you should have no problem with it. Okay, so we've started to fill in the areas ever so slightly. So let's move on. Squeak, squeak, squeak. To the metal here at the top. So I'm going to take my HB pencil. Squeak, squeak, squeak. It's making me think of Cusco. Emperor Cusco. What's his name? The big one that speaks squirrel. Oh, I don't know. It will come to me later in the day. Let's take the HB. So very similar to your metal chain. We did focus on your darker parts first. So the most obvious one is right here in the middle. I'm going to keep my mono eraser close to clean up, and also if I make a mistake just to quickly correct it. So for most of these pieces, you will have to simplify your reflections. Kind of pick your main ones and then go from there, because it's quite cramped space in this area. One must just be aware of that. So obviously I stopped short of this area in the previous part. So I'm just cleaning up and defining my shapes. And since I'm here, I'm just gonna also, with the HB, just add some depth in this area. So I'd like to have my values in and almost correct before I do the stitching, because that's also one of those areas that's going to have to be get in, get out, basically. I actually want to use a different pencil, so I'm going to take an F for this flat metal piece. And just change your pressure as you see changes in values, and that way you can start to kind of lay down that as well. And anything that you missed, well, I probably missed more than you. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Here's my little one. So you'll also notice that I don't go over the whole area all the time. I sometimes kind of put in a few little bits of pencil and then I'll blend out the pencil into the rest of the area. Kind of just always done that. It's part laziness and part I know I don't need to fill in the entire area. To kind of get it to look somewhat like it's supposed to. This is quite simple in its shapes. Here it's gone a bit, need to define these edges more. There. Here you don't need to oversimplify as much. Here you can actually add a nice bit of chunk of details actually. You can see in relation to the other metal pieces, this one isn't as smooth actually. It's got almost this type of distressed leather texture. And this kind of braidy type circular unicorn horn type thing is a very similar method in which you will say if something was braided. It's not too far off that kind of shadows, the way the shadows and the highlights look. It's very, very similar, almost like a rivet type. Okay, so before I move, let me just quickly add in this here. Almost like I'm making mental notes for these areas. There you go. So before I kind of move along to these very, in comparison to the other metal, you can see it's very bright, it's very highlighted. I'm going to start kind of completing the values around these areas. Okay, so let's start refining a bit of our shadows. I am going to take, I want to see actually, I'm going to take an F pencil. And we're going to start where we started initially, in this area, right here. So this will still be very similar to how we approached everything else. And I will I think I will kind of go over everything as I move across. I think it just maybe sometimes be easier. So if you see me move onto other areas, you don't necessarily have to do the same, because our approach would be very similar to all the other areas. So if you've been through the first 3 parts, you would kind of know the steps by now. So I'm going to take a blending stump. I'm going to add powder to it first. And then I'm going to blend from where I added the pencil downwards. You don't need to add powder continuously. It kind of lasts through all the steps. Then I'm going to just take a brush, and if you go over some of the metal, that's fine. And you just kind of scratch it to look a bit smoother. Back with my F pencil. So I don't necessarily do the entire area first and then do the following step. It depends on the area, obviously, but sometimes I kind of do it in bits and pieces. So for this area, I'm not going to add any powder because it's lighter than that top part. Still haven't added any highlights, so I'm going to quickly do that. So you can see this metal has kind of started to blend in because of that application of powder with the brush. So take a look at your reference. Ever so slightly add where you would see your highlights. Obviously I'm being very loose, not very precise. I mean, you don't have to. You can even just drag a line across and then later go in with your pencil and define that. So it's very much like adding too much and then taking away with your pencil. I generally tend to do that with the mono eraser because it's small in size, but obviously you are limited in how small you can add your details. So I tend to add a bit too much and then you just correct with your pencil. Blend. Then, now we're going in with the pencil. Kind of still be in the same value area as you go along, but it should still look different enough. So as you can see there, it's now a bit more defined in its shape. Just taking a brush with some powder on it. Now just giving a 2B a sharpen. I think with this 2B I'm going to go down straight directly towards the leather and this sorry, bottom area. Still using very light pressure. There's no need to use harder pressure as you go up in your range. And then just taking an 2H just to fill in that gap there. So obviously with the softer pressure with your B pencils, you're obviously going to get a more grainier look if you've got a paper with a grain. So this is just something that you'll have to be patient with in getting rid of, as it does sometimes take a little bit more time, especially if you're working in smaller areas. It's just unfortunately one of those things, but I don't mind it as it can be very useful in adding textures without having to try too hard. So I'm just going to take my 2H. So this is one of those layering techniques that you can use to remove some of the graininess. So now I'm just going to take my kneaded eraser and just slightly start. Obviously the way we've shaded it now, doesn't create that illusion of it being rounded, but that will come as we develop our values. I'm just going to take a mono eraser and just add in slightly. So I also like to use the mono eraser in also a sort of way to start subtly adding some textural little kind of almost feeling to it. Because the kneaded eraser doesn't take away a lot, you can still use your mono eraser to add even more highlight within the highlight. So, 2B pencil. Into our leather strap closest to all the other stuff, the metal things, and so I'm going to use this to be in the metal as well. So all of this is slightly, I would say, a bit dark in value, and obviously this is very similar. So just using the 2B, just adding a slight darker edge to it. To this bottom part, so that I can add depth. If you do erase an area, just take a pencil with a lighter grade just to fill up that space again and add the lines. I just did that with an F pencil lying around. So I'm going to take this 2B now, add the depth. So I'm going to keep closest to this side first because it very kind of gradually lightens up as it goes down, and then it gets slightly textured, ever so slightly. Just soft pressure, and then it's got obviously this darker line. So stump, some powder, same what you did up here. Just gonna add another little layer of powder. There. Back in with 2B, and we'll just continue on kind of deepening up areas. Gonna skip the bells first and continue on this one. Blending stump with some powder. And because that's such a small little area, I'm just going to use what's left over. And also just go into this fringe bit and add a layer of powder. Right, so I'm not going to use the 2B on the bells. I'm actually going to use an HB pencil first for the shadowed areas. But still employing very light pressure. And also using it to bring the shape a bit more into focus. Also just going to take my HB into the metal trim, and then just once you get to the lighter areas, just blend it out. Okay, so now we filled kind of majority of the space. I'm still gonna do this whole metal stuff. So yeah, we filled that. Now I feel like I want to actually move on to something else. Let me just quickly, I think I want to kind of work on this middle bit and get the depth correct of what looks like this leather back thing, that I can start the stitching. I don't know how that's gonna go, but I feel like I need to move on to something else just for now. So I'm gonna play around with the depth of this and what's behind the chain, and then slowly start, because I need to add these metal things as well. Yeah, so I just want to start getting rid of all the white spaces, have everything have some form of pencil marks on it, and then yes, we'll go from there. So let me just find a pencil. Okay, so I picked up a 7B. And we're gonna, because this is still quite grainy, the highlight is too highlighted, and obviously this is still a lot lighter than it should be. So I'm gonna take my 7B. This is gonna be quite a jump in depth. I think the darkest we went for this part was a 5B, maybe a 3 or 4B. I can't remember, but definitely not something this dark. So I'm going to start with the darkest shadowed part first. And as you can see, big, ooh, very dark. Big difference once you really start adding that very noticeable depth. But this is definitely where you start seeing everything come more alive, look way more realistic. And I'm taking my time with putting this pencil down just to make sure that I'm getting a smooth application and getting rid of that grainy look as I go along. So I'm going to take my F pencil. I'm actually going to take the Cretacolor one. Where is it? Where is it? It's this one. And I'm obviously using a lot more pressure than I would in those initial layers. So as you can see, I basically use it to bridge the gap between the 7B and what's the more lighter parts. And that's what's really useful, to have pencils that can layer on top of one another, no matter kind of how much layering you've already done. So already you can see the big difference in depth, and I'm going to play around with, I'm going to take a 4B as well into where I've added that F, so that we can build in some subtle kind of folds and differences in the shape. And then just gonna take my mono eraser. This shouldn't do much. I'm not even gonna clean it. Just to, you can see, just slightly bring back some value differences. Back in with my 7B. I'm going to kind of do the same thing as what we did with the 4B. I'm going to even go over those areas. So you can see the big difference between that and this. And this will kind of be of similar vibes and depth. So still have my 7B in hand. Just going in and adding depth. And then my F pencil, I'm going to go over that areas where I applied the 7B, smooth it out. See, it works very well. just blend with the blending stump. You can still see some of that kind of grainy look come through. This is my 4B pencil. For edge of the strap, I'm just going to take an F and define it. Since I've got the F pencil in hand, I'm going to just go over material as well. F pencil again. Small little blending stump. So as you can see, the depth is very easy to add, and because you've done all that work underneath, it's a lot easier to be liberal with your application. You've done the work already. You don't have to. This is just my 7B. You don't have to worry about making a mistake, about putting a shadow at the wrong place. It's now just a lot easier. .4B pencil. And you don't even have to use a lot of pressure because it just builds very easily. Blending stump. And then I'm going to take my stiffer bristle brush, add some powder, tap off the excess. I'm just going to go over that little part. Mono eraser, so you can slightly see texture from this material. I'm going to kind of add to it. If I don't like the way it's looking, then I'll just add the highlights as it looks. It's almost canvasy that rougher type of burlappy texture. Still visible in the shadows. So those are the type of subtle texture details that you'd lose if you go very heavy-handed with your contrast in the editing process, basically. This is my HB pencil. And you can also use the pencil to create those textures that you see. So that's now at, I would say, a very close to the end depth. Already it's going to help make a big difference to the areas surrounding it. This is just my F pencil. Okay, so now we've added a very solid area of close to completion values. As you can see, it's nice and dark compared to the rest. So it's kind of in the shadows, but you can see there, that's kind of now our reference point for everything else, depth-wise. So we shall continue forwards. I'm going to take my 4B. So this metal we kind of didn't really work on. I'm still going to leave it as it is now. I'm first going to focus on the surrounding areas. So this is just the 4B. So here you can kind of create just a straight line, and as you do your stitching you can add those little chevron-y pattern to it. So here we've got some reflections, so just don't do the entire area in your 4B, keep it close to the metal first. Frictions is very subtle. Here we got depth again, and then subtle reflections. So we'll employ a very similar B pencil, F pencil type of layering to this kind of material. And here I've already created a nice and smooth layer so that 4B doesn't create that grainy look as it did up here. So it's going on a lot smoother. So I'm just adding a layer depth first. When we do the stitching, we'll clean up and make everything very crisp. Kind of already started doing that. So your main reflection is here at the top, which we kind of already added. And then you've got your darker parts right there. Similar down here at the bottom. It's applying nice and smoothly, you don't get that grain. Here you have more differences and reflections. So, F pencil, and we go back up here to the top. Just start smoothing everything out. And because it wasn't very easy to remove pencil here, I'm not too worried about the reflections. So I'm just going to add it for this area, some powder on my blending stump. And give it a nice smooth over. Add even another layer. There we go. Right, so I'm going for the stitching. I'm first going to work on the negative spaces, so what's in between and here, just to get the rough shape. Doesn't have to be perfect first. Just need the basic outline. And then I'm gonna color it in. Not being very precise. I mean, this is just your initial layer. And the same on this side. Now for the middle bit. So at the top it's more of a straight line, and then it becomes here more the defined jagged edge. Then it dips in. And then just fill in your negative space. Your negative spaces are extremely useful in these instances. Sometimes it's a lot easier to just draw your negative space than it is to draw the actual object. It's so much easier. Your eye is not being forced by your brain to think, oh, I know what this shape is, I know how to draw it, I know what it looks like. And there's kind of no interference. It's just a lot easier to draw what you see. So much easier. There we go. So you've kind of got now the rough idea of your stitching's layout. And then here at the bottom, because it's a bit more defined in shape, it's a lot easier. Still just using my 2H pencil. It's kind of, along with the F pencil, the workhorse of your initial layers. So I'm just going to also just take my 2H and fill in these areas. Well, some of it. Basic shape down. Right. So I am going to call it a day on part 4. Yes. I think this is, if it's not part 4, then I think I'm definitely sure it's part 4. I am going to call it today on part 4. I will be continuing drawing it on my day, but obviously I think 2.5 hours, I can maybe push it to 3, but I think that's long enough for a tutorial by itself. So yeah, we filled in majority of the areas now. So part 5 will be building on that and kind of trying to get things to this level of completion. But yeah, now it's a lot, we filled in our gaps. The shapes are defined, the shapes are visible, all of them are filled in to some degree, have some form of pencil powder on it. So yeah, so hopefully, I think, I would say very optimistically part 5 will be the last, but if I know myself, I think there's at least 2 more parts in this drawing. Part 5 and 6, maybe even 7, might be slower progress because of the detail phase of the drawing and getting all of the textures and everything to where we want it. But yeah, so I hope you enjoy this part, and I'll see you for the next one. Hopefully after this part is up, we will have at least another sound of drawing and the start of a new kind of tutorial series, and then part 5 of this. So might be a little bit different, but that is the plan. So I hope you all have a good day wherever you are, and I will see you all for whatever video is up next. Cheers.